The air in the suite was expensive. It smelled of bleached cotton, salt air from the Pacific, and a faint, sweet cologne that clung to the pillows. It was the scent of a honeymoon gone wrong. My partner, Detective Benicio Reis, Ben to me, grunted, snapping a photo of the champagne bottle chilling in an ornate silver bucket. Honeymoon suite at the Grand Catalina Resort. Bride vanished. Groom is still here. You know what the odds on that are, Maya? I knew the odds. They were higher than the 35th floor we were currently standing on. Let's stick to the evidence, Ben. But there was almost no evidence. The room was pristine, too perfect for a struggle, and yet the police barrier tape stretched across the threshold told the truth. A woman named Celeste Thorne was missing. We found only two things out of place. The first was a single pearl earring, trampled slightly into the thick white carpet near the sliding glass doors. The second was the groom, Atticus Thorne. He was waiting for us in the resort's private meeting room, looking out over the endless blue ocean. He didn't look like a man whose wife of 3 days had vanished. He looked like a statue carved from wealth and grief, and he was breathtaking. When he turned, his face was smooth, almost serene. He was tall, dressed in tailored gray slacks and a white shirt that made his dark hair seem blacker. His eyes, a deep, unsettling shade of amber, met mine, and my heart hammered an illegal rhythm against my ribs. It was a purely physical, purely unprofessional jolt. The kind that made me instantly hate him for its inappropriateness. Detective Vance, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble completely devoid of panic. Thank you for coming. I can't imagine what has happened to Celeste. His composure was the most terrifying thing in the room. I'd seen 1,000 husbands on the worst days of their lives. They cried, they raged, they paced, they vomited. Atticus Thorne just stood there, his hands resting lightly on the back of his chair, waiting for instructions. Mr. Thorne, can you walk me through the last 24 hours? I pulled out my notebook, ignoring the voice in my head that screamed, he's lying. He's the one. He did. He spoke of dinner, a late-night swim, and Celeste complaining of a headache. He'd kissed her good night and fallen asleep. When he woke at dawn, the bed beside him was empty. The glass doors were unlocked. Did you notice anything unusual? I asked, focusing on the dark crescent shadows under his eyes. Even composed, he was exhausted. He paused, tilting his head slightly. Only this, detective. When I returned from the kitchen just now, I found this tucked into the edge of the carpet near the dressing table. He held out a small, heavy piece of folded paper. It was a note, and it was the first thing that made me truly unsettled. The note was written in Celeste's elegant, flowing script. Everything is fine. Needed air. Don't worry. Call later. See. It looks like a suicide note or a walk-off note, Ben said, leaning over my shoulder. But it sounds off. I ignored Ben. I looked at the note, then back at Atticus's perfect, controlled face. His eyes were wide, inviting my scrutiny. You believe this is from your wife, Mr. Thorne? It is her handwriting, he confirmed, his voice neutral. But it makes no sense. We were happy. We just started our life together. Why would she write such a thing and slip it under the carpet? Why not leave it on the pillow? His calm explanation was flawless, the concern plausible, but the amber of his eyes seemed to hold a secret that had nothing to do with grief. It was power. Control. He's manipulating you, a part of me whispered. He thinks you'll buy the story. But the other part, the treacherous part that was still reeling from the sudden, sharp awareness of his proximity, found itself asking, what if he's innocent? What if he's telling the truth and she just walked away? I tucked the note into an evidence bag, my fingers brushing against his cool skin as I took the paper. The brief, static electricity of that touch was enough to short-circuit my focus. We'll take this, Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. We will need to take you down to the station to officially file the missing persons report, and take a statement about your movements yesterday. We are just starting this investigation, but for now, you are the last person to have seen Celeste alive. He gave a slow, measured nod, his gaze never leaving mine. I understand, Detective Vance. Whatever it takes. I want my wife back. He walked toward the door, past Ben, past the uniformed officers, and I watched the strong, confident line of his back. He moved like a king, powerful, accustomed to silent obedience and carrying a burden I couldn't yet see. I knew with chilling certainty that this case was going to destroy my career or my heart. Maybe both. Chapter 1. The station was a blur of fluorescent lights and bad coffee. Atticus Thorne sat across from me in the interrogation room, not in the suspect chair, but at the small table reserved for interviews and victims' families. He was a prime suspect, but he was also the reporting party. I needed to maintain the delicate illusion of neutrality. Benicio had stayed behind to process the crime scene, the sterile honeymoon suite, which meant I was alone with Atticus. That quiet, unsettling composure of his hadn't cracked, not even after 3 hours of rigorous questioning. "I understand this is difficult, Mr. Thorne," I said, leaning forward. "But we need to cover every detail. Tell me again about the argument." He ran a hand over his tired face. "It wasn't an argument, Detective. It was a disagreement." The resort manager noted voices were raised. Specifically, she mentioned hearing the name Elias. Atticus sighed, the sound barely audible. "Celeste has a complicated family history. Her grandfather, Elias, passed away recently, leaving her a substantial inheritance. But the terms of the will required her to marry before the age of 30 to claim it. The wedding was fast, maybe too fast. We had a brief argument about how quickly things were moving, and whether she truly needed to prove herself to a dead man. It was a perfectly logical motive for stress, but not for vanishing." "And you went to bed immediately after this disagreement?" "Yes. We didn't sleep in separate rooms, if that's what you're implying. We had a disagreement, not a crisis. I offered her a sleeping pill, but she declined, said she needed to think. Then nothing. I fell asleep. I watched his throat tighten when he swallowed. He was giving me nothing but clean, plausible answers." "The note," I pressed, pulling out the evidence photo of Celeste's note. "Everything is fine. Needed air. Don't worry. Call later." See. Why would she write "everything is fine" if she was upset enough to leave? Atticus's gaze locked onto mine, suddenly sharp. "That is the only thing, Detective Vance, that has convinced me something is deeply wrong. Celeste is meticulous. If she truly intended to take a walk to cool off, she wouldn't write a note and hide it under the carpet. She would leave it in plain sight. Someone else wrote that, or someone forced her to." His suggestion was a calculated risk. By implying coercion, he was shifting the focus away from a simple walk-off and onto an actual crime. A kidnapping, perhaps, where he could just as easily be the victim as the perpetrator. And if someone forced her, who would that be? "Elias's other descendants," Atticus stated flatly. "They were furious about the inheritance. Her cousin Julian in particular. He stood to inherit everything if Celeste didn't marry in time." I noted the name, Julian. A new thread. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Benicio. "Found a security video feed from the garage 2 blocks over. Got a clear shot of the car that picked up the trash from the resort dumpster at 3 a.m. Driver is wearing a high-vis vest. I want to check his shift times." Atticus was still talking about Julian, but my mind was already pulling away. My instinct told me the note was a red herring. The real danger was in the small, forgotten details. I ended the interview, thanking Atticus for his cooperation, and telling him he was free to go but must remain in the city. Relief flickered across his face, gone in an instant. Later that evening, in my cramped, dark office, I stared at the photo of the note again. The smooth, elegant writing. Celeste's handwriting. "Something's wrong with the font," I muttered, pulling up a database of handwriting samples. Celeste's signature on her marriage certificate was sweeping and bold. The C on the note was rounded, almost hesitant. Then I noticed something else. Something small, so tiny I almost dismissed it as a smudge. In the bottom right corner of the note, where the paper met the carpet, there was a faint, almost invisible mark. I zoomed in until the pixelation hurt my eyes. It wasn't a smudge. It was a single tiny puncture mark, almost like a needle had been stabbed through the paper. It was positioned exactly underneath the final letter of the word "later" and the C signature. I pulled out the pearl earring we had found on the carpet. It was a custom piece, the post a tiny, sharp spike of white gold. Coincidence? I shook my head. Atticus had found the note, tucked it into the carpet, then given it to us. But the note itself seemed designed to be ignored. I looked back at the puncture mark and then at the handwriting. Everything is fine. Needed air. Don't worry. Call later. See. If that tiny hole was intentional, it was a signal. A desperate plea hidden in plain sight. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Celeste was sending a coded message that meant she was alive. And if she was alive, Atticus Thorne might not be a killer but a captor. I looked at the puncture mark again, then at the elegant, smooth handwriting. I decided to try something reckless. I grabbed a pen and paper. I wrote the alphabet, then lined up a second piece of paper underneath, poking tiny holes with the earring post through the letters I wanted to communicate. The original note had the hole beneath the word later. What if the hole was meant to point to a message hidden in the text itself? I pulled out a physical copy of the note and held a magnifying glass to the word. Allure. The hole was beneath the R. Then I looked at the signature C. RC. Meant nothing. I tried the word before it. Hole beneath the L. RC. Suddenly, the smooth, perfect flow of the handwriting bothered me again. It was too beautiful. Celeste's marriage signature was bold, yes, but also contained small, messy imperfections. The sign of speed. The note was too controlled. I pulled up the marriage certificate again. Then I looked at the R in her married name, Thorne. It was drawn with a sharp, angular downstroke. Now I looked at the R in later on the note. It was looped, almost feminine. It is her handwriting, Atticus had said. But it makes no sense. What if it wasn't her handwriting at all? What if it was written by someone attempting to perfectly recreate her handwriting, someone who knew it well? And what if that single, tiny, panicked puncture mark was the only thing Celeste had been able to do to scream, "I did not write this"? My heart hammered again, but this time it wasn't fear or unprofessional attraction. It was the fierce, focused energy of a detective finding her quarry. I picked up the phone, adrenaline surging through me. "Benicio, I need you to find every public surveillance feed that captured Atticus Thorne's face the day Celeste vanished. I need to know who he met, where he went, and if he had time to perfect a forgery. I also needed to find Julian, the angry cousin, just in case Atticus was playing us all." But as I hung up, my gaze drifted back to the photo of Atticus in the interrogation room. His amber eyes, his calm, flawless mask. The kind of mask that hid a killer, or a devastated lover fighting a war. The puncture mark was the thread. And I was about to pull it until the whole tapestry unraveled. The investigation immediately split into two equally volatile paths. The professional hunt for Celeste and the dangerously unprofessional proximity to Atticus. The first path led us straight to Julian Vance, Celeste's disgruntled cousin. Benicio and I tracked him down at his sprawling, undermaintained estate 2 states over. Julian was every bit the entitled, spoiled rich boy Atticus had painted. Loud, resentful, and too quick to offer an alibi. He claimed he was on a fishing trip. A story that collapsed when we realized the date on his fishing license receipt was a blatant forgery. "He's textbook motive and opportunity," Benicio noted as we drove back to the city. "If Atticus is telling the truth about the inheritance, Julian stands to gain millions if Celeste is never found. But would Julian forge the note and leave a pearl earring behind?" I countered. "It's too theatrical for a simple opportunist. And why hide the note under the carpet? It feels designed to be discovered by the right person, not just missed." The more I learned about Julian, the more I felt he was a distracting curtain, meant to keep us from seeing the main performance. The second, more hazardous path involved Atticus. Our background check revealed that Atticus Thorne, the wealthy, charming CEO of Thorne Global, didn't exist 2 years ago. He had a name change. Detective Elias Cruz, a nervous, meticulous analyst from our white-collar crimes unit, informed me the next morning. 2 years ago he was Adam Kent. He was a low-level financial advisor, respectable, but nothing like the titan he is now. Adam Kent. I frowned. Why the change? It was seamless. Clean paperwork. Said he wanted to honor his mother's maiden name after she passed. But the weird thing is the timing. He started dating Celeste a month after the name change, right around the time Elias Thorne's health started failing. The timeline suddenly looked suspicious. Adam Kent becomes Atticus Thorne, acquires massive wealth, immediately courts the heiress, and marries her just in time to claim an inheritance that her cousin is desperately trying to block. So, a professional gold digger, I summarized, feeling a sickening plunge in my stomach that had nothing to do with solving the case. I let myself be distracted by a gold digger. My phone buzzed. It was Atticus. Detective Vance, I apologize for the interruption. I was hoping I could come down to the station. I found something of Celeste's that might be important. I gripped the phone tightly. He hadn't just called. He had called me. Not the station, not the general line. I'll come to you, Mr. Thorne. Where are you? The loft. Our real home. It's better to see it here. Atticus's loft was perched above the city, a cathedral of glass and steel. It was elegant, cold, and utterly lacking in personal touches. Everything was pristine, curated. It didn't look like a home built for a marriage. It looked like a display case for an acquisition. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city lights. He hadn't changed clothes since yesterday. Thank you for coming, Maya, he said, using my first name for the first time. The casual familiarity felt like a deliberate breach of the professional boundary. It's Detective Vance, Mr. Thorne. He turned, his amber eyes softening slightly. Of course. But I feel as though we're closer than that now. We're working together to find her, aren't we? I ignored the bait. What did you find? He led me to a minimalist desk. He held up a silver locket. It was plain simple. Celeste wore this every day, he explained. It belonged to her mother. It was open on the desk. Inside she always kept a small, perfectly folded square of paper. It's gone. I took the locket, noting the emptiness inside. Was it a picture? A memento? She never told me. She always said it was her most valuable secret. She never let anyone touch it, not even me. Atticus paused, his voice finally losing its practiced composure. A genuine tremor of pain entered his tone. Whoever took her, they must have taken that too. It must have meant something to them. I studied the empty locket. The missing most valuable secret seemed more important than all the inheritance money combined. I need to be direct with you, Mr. Thorne, I said, forcing myself to look him in the eye. We've run background checks. 2 years ago your name was Adam Kent. You changed it just before you met Celeste. We need to know why. His mask of composure slipped, not into panic but into deep, genuine weariness. The name change was necessary to leave the past behind, he admitted quietly. Adam Kent was a good man, but he was financially ruined. I lost everything, detective. My business, my reputation. I changed my name to build a new life, a better one. And that better life happened to include marrying an heiress? I challenged. He walked closer to me, slowly, deliberately closing the distance until I could smell that sweet, expensive cologne again. He stopped just short of my personal space, his gaze intensely focused. I won't lie. I was looking for security. But I fell in love with Celeste, Maya. And that's the truth. And if you think I hurt her, you're wrong. I would never hurt her. I was close enough to see the exhaustion in the fine lines around his eyes, close enough that my professional distance was shattering. He was using my first name again, and this time I didn't correct him. I retreated, turning my attention to the desk. Under the blotter, I saw a calendar, thick with Celeste's meticulous notes about wedding planning. Most of it was standard, dress-fitting, florist appointment. But then I saw the entry for the day she disappeared. Tuesday 14th, honeymoon, 3 a.m., CB. 3 letters. CBA. I stared at them, my mind racing through possible meanings. Committee on Budget Administration? Call Benicio alert? Then I remembered the note. The tiny puncture mark beneath L in call, R in later, and C in C. I pulled out my phone and quickly texted Benicio the letters. CBA. 5 minutes later my phone pinged with his reply. He'd gone old school, checking military and naval codes. Benicio, found it. CBA is Old Naval Flag Signal. It means, I am under fire/attack and require immediate assistance. I looked up from the phone, the cold realization hitting me like a physical blow. The note Atticus had found and given to us was not a suicide or walk-off message. It was a perfectly recreated forgery, ruined by a desperate tiny puncture mark that pointed to a separate three-letter SOS. Celeste wasn't just missing. She was being held. And if Atticus was truly cooperating, why hadn't he seen the letters CB on his wife's own calendar? I looked back at Atticus, who was watching me with those mesmerizing amber eyes, his expression calm, inviting. I saw the gold digger, the man with the fake name, the prime suspect. But I also saw the exhausted man who had just used my first name and confessed a terrible truth about his past. I was falling for a man who was actively lying to me. And I had to decide if he was lying to protect himself, or lying to protect his kidnapped wife. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice steady despite the seismic shift in the case. "We'll be in touch." I left the loft, but I didn't drive away. I circled the block, pulled over, and watched the steel and glass fortress of his building. I knew I couldn't trust him. But I needed him close. I needed him to think I was still buying the grief. I needed to know what he was really fighting. I had to find Celeste, and I had to find out if the man I was falling for was a hero or a killer. Chapter 3. The first thing I did was get a warrant to search the loft again, specifically looking for the most valuable secret that Celeste kept in her locket. Atticus surprisingly didn't fight it. He simply told his lawyers to cooperate, which was either the perfect act of an innocent man or the supreme arrogance of a guilty one. While Benicio and the technical team searched the loft, I focused on the coded message, the tiny puncture mark on the note pointing to the letters CBA on the calendar. If Celeste was under fire, she was sending signals. I pulled up photos of the pearl earring we found, the one with the sharp white gold post. It was a custom design. A jeweler in the city confirmed it was one of a pair commissioned by Atticus for Celeste as a wedding gift. She only wore them once for the rehearsal dinner, the jeweler, a woman named Dahlia, told me. She loved them. Said they were sharp little secrets. Sharp little secrets. That was exactly what Celeste was using. I went back to the original ransom note and ran my fingers over the paper in the evidence bag. The puncture mark was minuscule, deliberately hidden. It was an acrostic or a steganographic clue, a message hidden within an innocent one. My mind raced back to the original forged note. "Everything is fine. Needed air. Don't worry. Call later." See. The puncture mark was under the R in later, and the C in the signature. I realized I'd made a mistake focusing only on the letters on the calendar. What if the puncture mark itself was the key, the way Celeste intended to point to her location, or even the identity of her captor? I used a grid overlay, lining the note up with a basic QWERTY keyboard layout. The puncture mark under the R in later. On a QWERTY keyboard, the key right next to R is T above it, and F below it. I got nowhere. I tried the alphabet. A equals 1, B equals 2. R equals 18, C equals 3. That gave me 183. Still nothing. Later that evening, the tension between me and Atticus hit a new high. He called my private number, his voice rough. "Did you find anything, Maya?" he asked, completely bypassing any formality. "That's confidential, Mr. Thorne." "Atticus. We are beyond Mr. and Detective. My house was just raided. My wife is gone. The man you're looking for is either Julian, or someone who wants to hurt me, and you're wasting time chasing after a name change." His frustration sounded raw, not practiced. It tugged at the part of me that desperately wanted to believe him. "Did you ever see Celeste with a small, folded piece of paper inside her locket?" I asked, changing tactics. A beat of silence. "Yes. I told you she called it her secret." "Did she ever write on it, show it to anyone, or hint at what it contained?" "She did tell me one thing once," he admitted, his voice low. "She said it was the key to understanding everything. That it was the only way to be sure." "Be sure of what?" "She never said. But when we were dating, she'd sometimes get anxious about Elias's will, worried about Julian. She mentioned that if anything happened to her, I should look at her locket because it contained proof." "Proof? Proof of what? Julian's nefarious plot? Or proof of Atticus's deception?" Just as I was about to hang up, Benicio burst into my office. He held up a small, sealed bag. Bingo, Maya. They tore up the floorboards in the study. Found this wedged deep beneath a loose baseboard. I took the bag. Inside was the missing item. The small, perfectly folded square of paper that should have been in the locket. I opened it carefully. It wasn't a photograph or a contract. It was a single sentence written in tiny, immaculate script. Celeste's script this time, messy with frantic speed. The lock is the second life. I stared at the paper, then back at the phone where Atticus was still waiting, breathing heavily. I have to go, Mr. Thorne, I said curtly, hanging up before he could press me. The lock is the second life. What did that mean? The lock could refer to the locket itself, but we already found the paper. The lock could refer to a security lock, a vault, or a safe. Second life could be Atticus's former identity, Adam Kent, the second life he'd built after his ruin. I suddenly realized Atticus's calm cooperation wasn't innocence. It was a distraction. He knew exactly what was on this paper, and he had hidden it because it pointed straight to his first life, the one he claimed he left behind. Benicio, I said, pointing to the message. Run the name Adam Kent through the financial crimes database again. But this time I want every single name, every property, and every business associate connected to his life before the name change. He said he was ruined. I want to know who ruined him and if Celeste knew. Benicio nodded and hurried out. I sat back, the little note burning in my hand. The lock is the second life. If the lock was Atticus Thorne, the second life was Adam Kent. But there was a more literal interpretation. I remembered what the analyst had told me. Atticus Thorne changed his name because he was financially ruined. I pulled up the marriage certificate photo on my computer again. I focused on Celeste's new married name, Celeste Thorne. Then I focused on the R in later on the forged note, the one with the hidden puncture mark. The forged R was looped. The real R on her marriage license was sharp. I zoomed in on the signature of her maiden name, Celeste Elias Thorne. The middle name was her grandfather's name. Wait. Her grandfather's name was Elias. The resort manager heard them arguing and mentioned the name Elias. I quickly checked the original legal documents for the inheritance. The will stated that if Celeste died or failed to meet the marriage clause, the inheritance would go to her cousin Julian, unless she could prove that she had suffered direct financial damage at the hands of one of the other beneficiaries. The lock is the second life. A chilling thought struck me. What if the lock wasn't a physical object, but a legal maneuver? I looked up the name Adam Kent again. I cross-referenced him with Elias Thorne's other businesses. And there was. Before his name change, Adam Kent had been the financial advisor for a small subsidiary company owned by Elias Thorne. 2 years ago, that subsidiary was bankrupted in a hostile takeover that was brutal and sudden. And the man who orchestrated the hostile takeover, the man who ruined Adam Kent's life? Celeste's grandfather, Elias Thorne. Atticus hadn't married Celeste for the money. He'd married her for the name and the revenge. He needed to be her husband to dismantle the Thorne legacy from the inside. Celeste knew this and was trying to stop him. But if he was plotting revenge, was he also a killer? I looked at the note. The lock is the second life. And then I saw it. The second, smaller hole on the forged note. It wasn't under the C in her signature. The puncture mark was under the E in fine. R-E. The letter R in later. And the letter E in fine. I held the note up to the light, lining up the puncture marks again. The marks weren't pointing to the letters on the forged note. They were pointing to the letters on the QWERTY keyboard. R and E were side by side on the keyboard. When you press R and E together, you get no word. But if you pressed and held them, you were typing the first 2 letters of the name of the man who ruined Adam Kent. Reyes. Benicio Reyes. My partner. Panic flooded my chest. I scrambled for the phone to call Benicio, but as I did, my office door swung open. It wasn't Benicio. It was Atticus Thorne. He was holding a key card, Benicio's key card. He was completely calm, and those amber eyes were flat, terrifying. "Looking for your partner, Maya?" he asked, his voice soft, almost sympathetic. "I told you I would never hurt Celeste." But I can't say the same for anyone else who tries to ruin me. Especially if they're holding my wife hostage. Chapter 4. A cold wave of terror washed over me, instantly eclipsing the shock of the coded message. I didn't reach for my service weapon. Atticus was too close and too calm. His gaze held a dangerous mix of certainty and desperation. "Benicio isn't here, Atticus," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. I focused on the key card in his hand. "Where is he?" "He's safe for now. He's taking a much-needed vacation," Atticus replied, tossing the key card onto my desk. It skidded to a stop next to the locket note. "He won't be back until I tell him to be. And that depends on how much you decide to trust me, Maya." I stood up slowly, putting the desk between us. "You kidnapped my partner?" "I secured him. There's a difference. He needed to be off the board because he's a piece in Julian's game, or perhaps the one running it." My mind raced. Aries. The puncture marks pointing to his name. Could Celeste have been warning me about Benicio? "Celeste's grandfather, Elias Thorne, ruined you," I stated, watching his reaction closely. "You married her for revenge and wealth. You changed your name from Adam Kent. You're a fraud." Atticus didn't flinch. He walked slowly toward the window, his shoulders slumping slightly. "The Alpha King, as your analysis might say, built an empire on the bones of his enemies. Elias Thorne was my enemy. He wasn't just wealthy, Maya, he was cruel. 2 years ago he engineered a hostile takeover that didn't just ruin my business, it killed my father, who was his competitor. I came for justice." He turned back, his expression haunted. "I planned to expose his corruption using his own records, which Celeste, as his heir, inherited. But then, I fell in love with her. I truly did. She was kind, she was everything the Thorne family was not." He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. "I abandoned the revenge. I destroyed the evidence. But Julian didn't. Julian is obsessed with protecting the Thorne name and the money. He saw Celeste and I, the happy couple, as a threat to his inheritance and his family's reputation." "So you think Julian orchestrated this entire thing?" "I know it," Atticus insisted. "The forgery, the hidden note, the pearl earring. It was all designed to frame me, the reformed fraud, as the jealous, greedy killer. But Julian didn't anticipate 2 things. He pointed first to the small folded note on my desk. The lock is the second life. He didn't anticipate Celeste leaving me a clear, simple message. She knew he was watching us. She wanted me to connect the lock, the locket, with the second life, my identity as Adam Kent, to find the real lock." "And what's the real lock?" "The records," Atticus whispered. "The records of Elias's corruption that I hid. The financial ledger that would prove Julian used the Thorne family's dark money to bribe officials and cover up his own crimes. It's stored in a vault he can access." I felt a dizzying surge of conflicting emotions. This story was too perfect, too emotional. It was everything a victim would say to gain my trust. And the second thing Julian didn't anticipate? I challenged, my eyes narrowing. "You," Atticus said simply, stepping forward. He stopped just inches away. "He didn't anticipate you, Maya Vance, the detective who would look past the obvious red flags and see the tiny hole in the paper. He didn't anticipate you figuring out that Arius wasn't a warning about your partner's name, but a warning that Julian was communicating through him." I stiffened. "Julian is communicating through Benicio?" "Benicio has been Julian's contact inside the police department for years," Atticus revealed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial level. "He was the one who initially tipped Julian off about my name change. Julian likely used Benicio to plant evidence, or worse, he's using him now to control the investigation. Celeste's last coded message was to tell me not to trust Benicio Reyes, because he was the one who helped Julian lock her away." He reached out, his hand closing gently over the back of my neck, pulling me closer. The touch was possessive but not threatening. It was a silent plea for belief. "I need those records, Maya. If I turn them over, we can stop Julian and save Celeste. But I can't do it alone. I need you to lead the investigation, trust me, and find out where Julian is holding her before he realizes the cipher is broken." I stood utterly still, staring into the terrifying conviction of his amber eyes. I had 2 missing persons, 2 separate coded messages, and 1 deeply compromised heart. I made a choice that shattered every professional rule I had ever sworn to uphold. "Tell me where the records are, Atticus," I whispered. "And we save Celeste. Together." Chapter 5. Atticus led me through a hidden service entrance in the back of his loft building, down a rarely used emergency stairwell. We were moving like criminals, a detective and her prime suspect, all in the name of a rescue. My professional identity was hanging by a thread, but the adrenaline of the chase was too intoxicating to ignore. "The records aren't here," Atticus whispered, his voice low and urgent as we reached the ground floor parking garage. "They're in a private bank vault Julian controls, a safe deposit box, disguised as a records locker. And the lock is the second life," I muttered, recalling Celeste's note. "How does your old identity open a bank vault?" "It doesn't," Atticus said, his hand resting briefly on my arm to guide me past a parked SUV. "But Adam Kent's bankruptcy records do. When Elias ruined me, he transferred my few remaining assets into a dummy corporation with an obscure name. That corporation still exists, tied to my old legal identity. Julian doesn't know I kept it active. It's the only key that can bypass his control on that specific locker." He pulled out his phone and showed me a geolocation app. "Julian is holding Celeste at a family hunting lodge. It's remote, tucked deep in the San Gabriel Mountains. He left an accidental trace on his private jet's flight plan." "We go to the bank first," I insisted, tapping my badge. "We need the evidence against Julian before we move in on him, or we have no grounds for a federal search warrant." We moved quickly through the pre-dawn city streets, using my unmarked cruiser. Atticus, the calm, controlling executive, was suddenly reduced to a nervous accomplice, directing me to the bank's downtown branch. We reached the bank just as the first employees were arriving. Using a fabricated story about a high-stakes asset seizure involving the former Adam Kent, I convinced the nervous branch manager to open the high-security records area. Atticus, adopting his old persona, presented the obscure legal documents for the dormant corporation. The manager led us into the vault. It was a cold, quiet labyrinth of steel. "Locker 732, Atticus pointed. "That's the one Julian uses." The manager produced a key. Atticus hesitated, his eyes locked on the lock. "What is it?" I asked. If Julian knew Celeste was sending codes, he would have placed an alarm on this. "He's obsessed with this ledger." He gave the manager a terse instruction. "Open the locker but don't pull out the contents. Just confirm they are there." The manager followed the instruction. The heavy steel door clicked open an inch, revealing a thick, dark leather ledger inside. "The Thorne family financial records," Atticus breathed. "It's all here." "Good. Now we seal it, get the warrant, and go get Celeste," I said, reaching for my radio. But as I did, Atticus shoved me hard, pushing me against the cold steel of the vault wall. My head cracked against the metal, sending momentary stars across my vision. "Sorry, Maya," he hissed, no longer the exhausted husband but the ruthless businessman. He grabbed the ledger from the locker and slammed the door shut. The manager, stunned, was frozen in place. "Atticus, what are you doing?" I struggled to recover my balance, reaching for my weapon. "The records were never about Julian," he said, his eyes blazing with a dangerous triumph. "They were about Elias. He bankrupted me, yes, but he also murdered my father to do it. These records prove it. I married Celeste to get access, and I couldn't risk letting you or the police touch this until after my revenge was secured." He was confessing his true motive. Not kidnap, but high-stakes revenge. Celeste knew, I realized, the pieces finally clicking into place. She wasn't begging to be rescued from Julian. She was begging to be rescued from you. The coded messages, the fear, it wasn't about a greedy cousin. It was about her husband, the fraud, finally securing the evidence that would destroy her family's name and legacy. Celeste hadn't been sending me clues about Benicio. She was sending them about the aria of revenge and the true purpose of the lock. "Celeste didn't send you those messages, Maya," Atticus said, his tone chillingly flat. "I did. I learned her handwriting just as you suspected. I staged the note, the earring, everything. I knew a good detective would look past the obvious. The puncture mark pointing to Reyes was to eliminate your partner and buy me time. The betrayal was a physical, sickening punch to my gut. The man I was falling for wasn't a hero, wasn't a killer, but a master manipulator who had used my professional focus and my personal attraction as his tools. Where is she, Atticus? I demanded, leveling my gun at him. He looked down at the heavy ledger, then back at me. She's at the hunting lodge, Maya. Julian has her. He realized I was stalling and he grabbed her. He intends to use her life to trade for these records. He took a step back, holding the ledger like a shield. I set all this in motion, but I genuinely love her and Julian will hurt her. I'm going to the lodge. You can stop me now, Maya, or you can come with me. But if you stop me, you save the Thorne family name and Celeste dies. He turned and ran, the ledger clutched under his arm, leaving me alone in the vault with the stunned bank manager and a shattering choice. I watched the emergency exit door swing shut behind him, sealing my fate. I had fallen for the killer's lie, and now my only path to redemption was to chase after him. I holstered my weapon. Call this in as a robbery, I instructed the manager, ignoring the rules. But tell dispatch to send a helicopter to the San Gabriel Mountains, coordinates to follow. We have a hostage situation. My investigation was now officially off the books, and I was speeding toward a mountain lodge with the man I loved, racing to save the wife who claimed he was a monster. Chapter 6. The chase to the San Gabriel Mountains was frantic. I used the patrol car's tracker to pinpoint Atticus's luxury SUV. He was driving toward the coordinates of the hunting lodge he'd mentioned, proving one thing. His immediate concern was getting to Celeste. I called in discreet backup, requesting a perimeter unit and a medic, deliberately avoiding mentioning the involvement of Detective Reyes or my own compromised status. This was now a rogue rescue mission and I needed to keep the narrative clean. When I reached the remote, heavily wooded property, Atticus's black SUV was already parked haphazardly near the secluded log cabin. I ditched my car a quarter-mile down the access road and proceeded on foot, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found Atticus on the porch, facing the thick wooden door, the leather ledger clutched under his arm. He looked less like a criminal and more like a man facing his execution. "Maya," he said, turning, his amber eyes flashing with genuine relief and surprise. "You came. You think I'd let you destroy the Thorne family without supervision?" I retorted, pulling my weapon and keeping it aimed at the ground. "Where is Julian?" "Inside. He saw me approaching. He's got Celeste." Atticus took a ragged breath. "He knows this is about the records now. He wants the ledger in exchange for her life." Just then a furious voice boomed from inside the cabin. "Atticus! You greedy fraud! Throw the ledger on the ground and step back or I swear your wife gets a bullet." The sound of a woman's sharp gasp, Celeste's voice, sent a jolt through me. She was alive. Atticus looked at me, his eyes pleading. "He's desperate. He won't hesitate. I have to give him this. The ledger is worth millions and contains evidence of murder," I countered, stepping closer. "We can't just hand it over. We need leverage. Her life is the only leverage that matters." Atticus yelled, then tossed the ledger forward, sliding it across the worn wooden porch. "Julian, the records are yours. Let her go." The door cracked open just enough for us to see Julian's pale, sweating face, twisted with manic triumph. He snatched the ledger and pulled the door shut. "Good boy, Atticus," Julian sneered from behind the door. "Now I have my legacy and I can start erasing the mess you created. Let Celeste go." Atticus roared. "Oh, I will," Julian chuckled. "But not before she tells you a few home truths." The cabin door opened wider and Celeste was shoved out onto the porch. She was bruised, her clothes torn, but she was alive. "Atticus, run!" Celeste screamed, her eyes wide with frantic warning. "He's setting us up. He's calling the police to frame you for my murder." Julian, now holding a small silver pistol, stood directly behind her. "The police are already here, Julian," I called out, stepping into view, my badge reflecting the cabin light. Julian froze. His eyes darted to me, then to Atticus, then back to the pistol. He was trapped. Detective Vance? This is perfect. Julian shrieked, aiming the pistol at Atticus. He kidnapped her. He forced her to write those codes. He's the killer who poisoned Elias and framed me for the records theft. He was going to kill her here tonight. He spun, using Celeste as a shield, attempting to retreat back into the cabin. That's when Celeste saw her opening. She stomped hard on Julian's foot, driving the heel of her boot down, and then wrenched herself free. Julian screamed in pain and surprise, his focus completely broken. He stumbled, swinging the pistol wildly toward Atticus. "No!" I yelled. Atticus moved faster than I thought possible. He didn't run. He launched himself forward, tackling Julian just as the pistol went off. The shot was muffled, tearing harmlessly into the wooden doorframe. The gun skittered across the porch. I rushed forward, kicking the weapon away, and restrained Julian. He struggled and sobbed, his dreams of Thorn wealth dissolving into handcuffs. It was over. Julian was secured, Celeste was safe, and the ledger was recovered. I sat with Celeste on the porch steps while the perimeter unit arrived to take Julian into custody. Celeste, despite her trauma, was fiercely composed. "Thank you, Maya," she whispered, holding a blanket tight around her shoulders. "You deciphered my codes. Julian told me that was impossible." "You didn't code for Benicio Reyes, did you?" I asked, finally needing to clear the fog of my own betrayal. Celeste looked confused. "Benicio? No. The codes were for Atticus. The hole in the note was under the R and the E. It was pointing to his old email. Red Risk Edge Directive. It was the only secret address he kept from Julian. I was trying to warn him that Julian was moving on us. I felt a dizzying mix of relief and profound foolishness. Atticus hadn't made up the Arias story to manipulate me. He'd lied to cover his own secrets. His revenge plot, after seeing me zeroing in on the letters R and E. Atticus emerged from the cabin, having checked the perimeter. He walked straight past the officers and knelt in front of Celeste, wrapping her in a fierce, protective hug. "I'm so sorry, Celeste," he murmured into her hair. "I should have told you about Elias. I should have told you about the ledger and my revenge." "I know, Kane," she said softly, using a name that was unfamiliar to me. "I found the records you destroyed. I knew you were going to use them to destroy my family name, and I was going to stop you. But when Julian took me, I knew I needed you, the real you, to save me." She looked up at him with a tenderness that confirmed their bond. They were a couple bound by shared secrets and complicated love, not just a fraudulent marriage. Atticus rose and looked at me, his gaze somber. "My real name, Maya, is Kane Thorn. I am Elias's son, raised by another family. Elias had me erased after my mother died so his illegitimate line wouldn't interfere with the inheritance. That's the real reason for the name change and the secrecy. I changed it to Atticus Thorn to reclaim my position." Thank you for tuning in to this high-stakes romantic thriller. We watched Detective Maya Vance risk her career and her heart, proving that the line between love and deception is the thinnest thread. Kane Thorn, the complex heir, now stands free, but the sparks he left behind are only just starting to ignite. If this intense mix of mystery and romance left you craving more complex characters and dangerous secrets, you've found your home. Subscribe to Mystery and Roses right now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story, where we dive into another world of forbidden love and unforgivable betrayals. Let me know in the comments below. Do you trust Kane to tell the truth now, or will he always be the master manipulator?